The humidity of a late July evening in Savannah, Georgia, usually clings to everything like a wet wool blanket. But inside our restored Victorian home on Gaston Street, the air was frigid. It wasn't the high-end HVAC system I'd installed last summer. It was the psychological permafrost that had settled over my marriage to Madeline. I stood by the butcher block island, my fingers tracing the grain of the wood I had sanded and stained myself 3 years ago. I was watching her pack. Madeline didn't pack like someone who was heartbroken or fleeing in fear. She packed like a theater lead preparing for a final, climactic performance. Every silk blouse was folded with a sharp, aggressive snap. Every pair of designer heels was placed into her leather suitcase with a hollow thud that echoed through the 14-foot ceilings of our kitchen. She was moving in a calculated slow motion, glancing at me out of the corner of her eye, waiting for the moment I would crack. For 5 years, I had been the fixer. If she was unhappy, I bought jewelry from the boutiques on Broughton Street. If she felt stifled, I booked a month-long retreat in Napa. If she threatened to leave, I became a beggar. I would bar the door, weep, and promise to be better, even when I hadn't done anything wrong. She thrived on that desperation. It was her oxygen. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. "You're really just going to stand there, Caleb?" she asked finally. Her voice was tight, more trembling with a manufactured frailty that I once would have died to protect. "You're going to let 5 years of our life end because you're too stubborn to admit you've neglected my needs?" I looked at the clock above the stove. It was 6:14 p.m. The sunlight was beginning to turn a bruised purple over the moss-draped oaks outside. "I'm not stopping you, Madeline," I said. My voice sounded foreign, steady, dry, and devoid of the usual panic. "You've told me 3 times this week that you found a soulmate in that gallery owner in Charleston. You said I was a shackle on your creativity. Why would I want to be a shackle?" The look of pure, unadulterated shock that crossed her face was worth more than the equity in the house. She expected me to fall to my knees. Instead, I pulled out a chair and sat down to watch her leave. Want to understand why Madeline was so stunned? You have to understand the dynamic of our life in Savannah. We were the it couple of the local design scene. I was a software architect who had sold my first startup for a mid-7-figure sum, and she was the beautiful, ethereal artist who spent my money to curate a life that looked perfect on Instagram. The first time she threatened to leave was 6 months after our wedding. We were living in a high-rise in Atlanta then. I had stayed late at the office to close a contract that would eventually pay for our current lifestyle. I came home at 9 p.m. to find her sitting on a packed suitcase in the middle of the dark living room. She sobbed for 4 hours about how money didn't replace presence. I felt like a monster. I bought her a vintage Mercedes the next week as an "I'm sorry" gift. That was the day she learned that the grand departure was her ultimate leverage. Over the years, she used it to get everything she wanted. If I wanted to spend Christmas with my parents in Chicago instead of her socialite friends in Hilton Head, she'd pack a bag. If I questioned the $15,000 she spent on redecorating a room that was already perfect, she'd head for the door. I remembered a specific night 2 years ago. We were supposed to go to a gala at the Telfair Museums. I had a migraine, the kind that makes the light feel like needles. I asked if we could skip it. Madeline didn't offer water or an aspirin. She went to the closet, pulled out her luggage, and started throwing her evening gowns inside. "If you can't be a partner to me in my social world, then we don't have a world together," she had hissed. And I ended up going to the gala, nauseous and dizzy, just to keep her from walking out. But standing there in the kitchen now, looking at the third suitcase she'd pulled from the closet, I realized my guilt tank was empty. I had given her a life of absolute luxury, and her response was to constantly hold our marriage hostage. I was no longer a husband. I was a hostage negotiator who had finally decided to let the kidnapper walk away. Madeline realized her verbal jab hadn't worked, so she upped the ante. She walked to the pantry and began grabbing expensive bottles of wine I'd collected, labels from Bordeaux and Tuscany that cost more than most people's monthly rent. These weren't just drinks. They were investments I had carefully curated for our future anniversaries. I'm taking these, she snapped, shoving them into a padded crate, since you clearly don't appreciate the finer things I brought into this house. Take them, I said, leaning back. The cellar was getting crowded anyway, and strictly speaking, I paid for 80% of those finer things. But if it helps you feel more independent in Charleston, go ahead. She stopped, a bottle of 2012 Chateau Margaux in her hand. Her chest was heaving. What is wrong with you? Are you having a breakdown? Or are you seeing someone else? Is that why you don't care? Is there some girl from your office in Midtown who's filling your head with this nonsense? I let out a soft, genuine laugh. Madeline, I've worked 14 hours a day for years to make sure you never had to worry about a bill. When would I have time to see someone else? The difference today is that I finally started seeing you. I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention, like I'm an ATM with a pulse. If you think your soulmate in Charleston can provide this life for you, you should go to him. I genuinely mean that. I hope he has a very high credit limit. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. If you were in Caleb's shoes watching your partner pack up your expensive wine while accusing you of neglect, would you keep your cool or finally lose your temper? She slammed the crate shut. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. You'll be calling me by midnight, she hissed, her eyes narrowed. You can't even find your own socks without me. You'll be sitting in this big empty house realizing you have no soul. Why? And you'll be begging me to come back and save you from yourself. I'll buy new socks, Madeline, and I'll enjoy the silence. It's a small price to pay for the end of this theater. The walk to the front door felt like a scene from a movie directed by someone who loved long, lingering shots of misery. Our foyer is a masterpiece of crown molding and hand-painted wallpaper from a boutique in London. Madeline stood there, her 3 suitcases lined up like soldiers. She was dressed in a white linen suit, looking every bit the tragic heroine, her blonde hair perfectly tousled. She turned the deadbolt. The sound was a heavy metallic clack that usually sent a shiver of dread down my spine. In the past, that sound meant I had failed. It meant I was about to lose the love of my life. This time, it sounded like a starting pistol for a race I was finally ready to run. This is it, Caleb, she said, her hand resting heavily on the brass knob. Once I walk out this door, the divorce papers will be served by Monday. I've already spoken to a firm in Atlanta. I'm going to take half of everything. The firm, the house, the Cape Cod property we bought last summer. I will ruin you for treating me like an afterthought. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked slowly toward her. I didn't rush. I didn't have that frantic energy I used to have. For a second, her eyes brightened. She saw me approaching, and she actually smirked. She thought the begging phase was finally starting. She leaned in slightly, tilting her head, waiting for me to grab her hand, pull her back, and tell her that Charleston didn't matter. Madeline, I said softly, standing just inches away. I could smell her expensive perfume, the one I bought her at a perfumery in the first arrondissement. The firm is protected by a rock-solid prenuptial agreement that your own father's lawyers vetted. The house was bought with an inheritance from my grandfather that is legally non-marital property. But you're right about one thing. It is over. You've threatened to leave so many times that you finally convinced me it was a good idea. I reached past her, opened the heavy oak door myself, and stepped aside. The heat of the Georgia night rushed in, smelling of jasmine and humidity. The Uber is idling at the curb. Don't keep him waiting. He's on a timer, and I'd hate for you to start your new life with a low passenger rating. She didn't move for 10 seconds. She looked out at the black sedan, waiting under the flickering street lamps of Gaston Street. This wasn't the script she had written. In her mind, she was supposed to walk out, and I was supposed to chase the car down the street like a madman, crying out her name in the rain. She grabbed the handles of her bags, her knuckles white. "You're a monster," she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. "No," I replied, looking her directly in the eye. "I'm just an audience member who's tired of the play, and the lead actress has become a bit one note." She stepped out onto the porch. I didn't wait for her to reach the car. I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a gentle final click. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I turned the security latch. Click. Then I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and breathed. Koi, for the first time in 5 years, the air in the house didn't feel like it was being sucked out by a vacuum. I heard the car door slam outside. I heard the engine rev. She probably told the driver to wait a second, hoping I'd burst out. I didn't. I heard the tires pull away from the curb, the gravel crunching under the wheels. I went to the window, pulled back the heavy velvet curtain, and watched the red taillights disappear around the corner of Forsyth Park. She was gone. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever reached that breaking point where you just stopped caring about someone's threats? Most men would have opened a bottle of scotch and spiraled into a "what have I done" depression. Most men would have called their friends to complain. Not me. I had been mourning this marriage for 2 years while sitting right next to her at dinner parties. I knew Madeline's patterns. I knew that by 2 a.m., the reality of a Marriott hotel room, no matter how many stars it had, would set in. She would realize she forgot her favorite silk pillowcase or her expensive night cream, and she would try to come back to talk as a way to regain entry. I had the locksmith's number saved in my phone under emergency. I'd been planning this for a month, ever since I found the first piece of evidence that she wasn't just unhappy, but was actively looking for a replacement. He arrived at 10:30 p.m., a grizzled guy named Miller who looked like he'd seen 1,000 divorces played out on door frames. He didn't ask questions. He changed the front door, the back door, and the side entrance to the detached garage. He handed me 4 new gleaming silver keys. By 3:15 a.m., my phone began to vibrate on the nightstand. I watched it glow in the dark. Madeline. I didn't answer. Then came the sound of a key scratching at the front door downstairs. I sat up in bed listening. It was a pathetic sound. I heard the handle jiggle. I heard it rattle violently. Then, the sound of a fist pounding on the solid oak. "Caleb, open the door. My key isn't working. Caleb, I know you're in there. Stop being a child." I didn't get out of bed. I pulled up the Ring camera on my phone. There she was, still in her white suit, looking frantic. She wasn't heartbroken. She was annoyed that her key to the kingdom had been deactivated. I typed one reply. "You told me you were leaving. Ah, I believed you. I've accepted your resignation as my wife. Go back to the hotel, Madeline. The locks are changed and the alarm is set. Don't make me call the Savannah PD." By the next afternoon, the family secrets and revenge began to play out on a public stage. Madeline was a master of narrative, and she knew she couldn't win in the silence of the house. So she turned to her most powerful weapon, her followers. She posted a black and white photo of herself sitting on her suitcase in the hotel hallway. The lighting was dramatic, clearly staged. The caption read, "Locked out of my own home in the middle of the night by the man I thought was my protector." 5 years of devotion ended with a changed lock and a cold text. Heartbroken doesn't even begin to cover the cruelty. My phone exploded. To her friends, women I had hosted for lavish brunch dates, whose husbands I had helped with business leads, sent me scathing messages. "How could you, Caleb? We always knew you were controlling, but this is a new low." I ignored it all. I didn't post a rebuttal. I didn't argue. I knew the truth, and more importantly, I had the footage. I had the recording of her telling me she found a soulmate and that she was going to ruin me. I had the footage of her laughing as she packed the wine. I tucked those files away like ammunition. 3 days after she left, I decided to do a deep clean of the home office. Madeline rarely used it, preferring to do her creative work at a boutique studio downtown that I paid the lease for. I was moving the heavy laser printer to dust behind it when I saw a corner of a manila folder sticking out from a hidden slit in the back of the desk. It wasn't my folder. I opened it, expecting to find old tax returns. Instead, I found a collection of bank statements from an account at a small credit union in Austin, Texas, an account I had never heard of. Madeline had been siphoning off the household expense money I gave her for 3 years. Every time I gave her $5,000 for new drapes, she'd buy $2,000 drapes and move the rest. She had over $80,000 stashed in a private account in her maiden name. But that wasn't the worst part. Tucked into the back of the folder were printouts of flight itineraries. Savannah to Austin, Austin to Savannah. Dates that lined up perfectly with her design conferences in New York or Chicago. She hadn't been in New York. She had been in Texas. And she hadn't just met a soulmate in Charleston recently. She had been maintaining a relationship with an architect in Austin for nearly 2 years. If you were Caleb, would you post that footage to clear your name? Or would you stay silent and let her look like the victim until the court date? It's a tough choice when your reputation is on the line. Let me know what you'd do in the comments below. I took the folder to my lawyer, Sarah Vance. Her office was in a historic building on Johnson Square, filled with the scent of old paper and leather-bound books. She was the kind of lawyer who didn't raise her voice because she didn't have to. "She's filed for temporary support, Caleb," Sarah said, sliding a document across the desk. "Wafar, she's asking for $15,000 a month while the divorce is pending. She's claiming she has no access to funds, no way to support herself, and that you've frozen her out of her own life." Her lawyer is playing the abandoned artist card very hard. I smiled, a slow, tired smile, and slid the Austin folder across the desk. "She's got $80,000 in a Chase account under her maiden name, Sarah, and she's been flying to Austin twice a month to see a man named Julian. I suspect he's the one who's been creatively inspiring her." Sarah flipped through the statements, her eyebrows rising with every page. "Well, this changes the destitute wife narrative quite a bit, doesn't it? In Georgia, adultery doesn't always bar alimony, but lying about your financial assets in a sworn affidavit certainly makes a judge less sympathetic." A week later, I was downtown for a meeting when I saw Madeline's car, the white Audi I was still paying the lease on, parked outside a high-end gallery on Liberty Street. I shouldn't have gone in, but I had a stack of her mail that I wanted to get out of my house. I walked in, and the bell above the door chimed. Madeline was there, dressed in a black silk slip dress, holding a glass of champagne. She was laughing with a group of people, including the gallery owner from Charleston. She looked like she didn't have a care in the world, until she saw me. The laughter died. She put on that familiar, practiced look of wounded pride. "Caleb," she said, her voice loud enough for the other patrons to hear, "I didn't think you'd have the nerve to show your face in public after what you did. Locking a woman out in the middle of the night? It's pathetic." "I'm just dropping off your tax documents and your American Express bill, Madeline," I said, placing the envelope on a nearby pedestal. "And I noticed you've been spending quite a bit at a hotel in Austin recently. I'm sure your soulmate here would love to hear about your trips to Texas." The man beside her, the Charleston gallery owner, stepped forward, trying to be the hero. "Hey man, there's no need for that. She's been through enough emotional abuse." I looked at him, really looked at him. He was younger, probably just as idealistic as I had been 5 years ago. "Good luck, kid," I said quietly. "Keep your bags packed by the door. You'll need them eventually. And then check your bank statements." I decided to dig deeper. I didn't want just a divorce. I wanted the full story. I hired a private investigator who specialized in high-asset domestic cases. He spent a week in Austin. What he found was the family secret that would end Madeline's legal crusade. The man in Austin, Julian, wasn't just an old flame. He was a struggling developer who had convinced Madeline to invest in a boutique hotel project. But the project was a scam. He had been using the money Madeline siphoned from me to pay off his own gambling debts at casinos in Louisiana. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story and share your thoughts in the comments. When you realize the person you loved has been stealing from your future to fund someone else's mistakes, how do you even begin to process that? The PI handed me a photo of Madeline and Julian at a high-stakes poker room. She looked happy. She looked like she was part of a glamorous, dangerous world. She didn't realize she was just the bankroll for a loser. We met in a sterile conference room for mediation. Madeline sat across from me, looking smug. She thought she still had the upper hand because she was the woman who was kicked out. "We want the house, the Cape Cod property, and a lump sum of $2 million, her lawyer stated. "My client has spent 5 years building your brand, Caleb. She deserves to be compensated for the emotional trauma of the lockout." "Let's talk about Julian," I said, leaning forward. Madeline's smirk vanished. "Who?" Julian Vance, the man you've been investing our household money into in Austin. E, the man who's currently under investigation by the Texas Gaming Commission for fraud. I laid the PI's report on the table. I have the wire transfer records. I have the photos of you at the casinos when you told me you were at design conferences. And I have the sworn statement from the hotel clerk in Austin. The silence in the room was absolute. Madeline's lawyer leaned over, whispered something in her ear, and then closed his briefcase. We're prepared to drop all claims for alimony in the Cape Cod house, Madeline's lawyer said, his voice now flat and professional. In exchange for a quiet, uncontested divorce. We don't need this going to trial. No, I said. You're going to sign over the equity in the Savannah house? You're going to return the jewelry I bought you in the last year. And you're going to post a retraction on your social media stating that I never locked you out or mistreated you. If you don't, I go to the district attorney with the embezzlement evidence. I'm done being the guy who pays for your mistakes. Madeline looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see the ethereal artist. I saw a scared, desperate woman who had gambled everything on my perceived weakness. She had expected me to beg her to stay because she thought I was too afraid to be alone. She didn't realize that being alone was 1,000 times better than being with a ghost. She signed the papers. Her hand was shaking so hard the signature was barely legible. Watching a manipulator realize their leverage has turned into a noose is a powerful moment. If you were in the room, would you have pushed for more? Or would you just want it to be over? Let me know in the comments below. The day the divorce was final, I didn't go to a bar. I went to the hardware store. I bought 5 gallons of Navajo white paint. I spent the next 48 hours stripping the Gaston Street house of every trace of Madeline. I sold the $20,000 sofa she'd picked out. I threw away the minimalist art that I'd always hated. I cleared out the closet that used to smell like her perfume and replaced it with my hiking gear and my old guitar. I realized that the family secrets weren't just hers. I had a secret too. I had been miserable for years and I had been too afraid to admit it. I had been addicted to the drama because I thought that's what passion looked like. But as I painted over the gray walls, I realized that peace is much more beautiful than passion. Freed from the constant emotional drain of Madeline's grand departures, my software firm doubled its revenue in 6 months. I had clarity, I had energy. I wasn't spending 4 hours a day managing her moods. I started this channel, Family Secrets and Revenge, as a way to process the stories I was hearing. I realized I wasn't alone. Thousands of people were being held hostage by partners who used leaving as a weapon. I shared my story, and the response was overwhelming. My revenge wasn't a public takedown of Madeline. It was the fact that I was thriving. I was healthy. I was traveling to places I actually wanted to see, not just places where Madeline could take good photos. I hiked the Appalachian Trail. I spent a month in Japan. I lived the life I had been paying for but never actually enjoying. A year after the divorce, I was in Phoenix for a tech conference. I was walking through the lobby of a mid-range hotel when I saw a woman coming out of one of the rooms with a cart of linens. It was Madeline. She looked exhausted. The silk suits were gone, replaced by a cheap polyester uniform. Her hair wasn't perfectly tousled. It was pulled back in a messy knot. Julian had apparently taken what was left of her money and vanished, leaving her with the debts and the fallout. She saw me and froze. For a moment, I felt a pang of the old guilt. I wanted to reach for my wallet, but then I remembered the folder behind the printer. I remembered the $80,000 she stole while I was working 16-hour days. Caleb, she whispered, I hope you found the soulmate you were looking for, Madeline, I said. I didn't say it with malice. I said it with a detached kind of pity. I walked past her and went to my meeting. Most people are terrified of the silence that follows a closed door. They think the silence is loneliness. They think if they aren't fighting, they aren't living. But they're wrong. The silence is the sound of your own life returning to you. It's the sound of your dignity being restored. Madeline expected a beggar, but she created a survivor. By refusing to play the role she wrote for me, I forced her to live in the reality she created. She wanted to walk out. I opened the door. She wanted to find herself. I let her get lost. This story is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. When someone threatens to leave you, believe them. Let them go. The space they leave behind is often the only room you have left to grow. And thank you for staying with me through this journey. It's a long road from being a hostage to being a hero in your own story, but it's a road worth traveling. I want to thank you for watching Family Secrets and Revenge. If Caleb's story hit home for you, or if you've ever had to stand your ground when someone expected you to crawl, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support allows us to keep bringing these deep dive stories of betrayal and redemption to light. I'd love to hear your overall thoughts on the Texas Secret. Did you see it coming? Share your perspective in the comments below, and I'll be there to join the conversation. Until next time, remember, the door works both ways. Use it wisely.